Welcome everybody again. We are in Perek Yud Chet of Sefer Melachim Bet. We're in the middle of the Perek. Now, just to remind you where we had been last week, Chizkiyahu HaMelech took over. Chizkiyahu had instituted many religious reforms in the sense that what Chizkiyahu accomplished was something that the Navi himself referred to that hadn't happened ever before since the times of David and Shlomo. He removed the bamot, which will play an important role not only in the area around Yehuda, but he also removed the bamot, if you recall, within Yerushalayim themselves. There were personal bamot that people had to offer their own sacrifices in Yerushalayim. His motivation was obviously to go back to what is appropriate. According to halacha, according to the halacha, in those days even, bamot were already prohibited once you had a Beit HaMikdash. They had been tacitly approved or ignored their existence throughout much of the era of the Melachim. Chizkiyahu got rid of them. Chizkiyahu also was in a process of bringing the northern tribes down to Yerushalayim. There was a great celebration which was taking place in Yerushalayim as well. Chizkiyahu did many reforms. We read about them, by the way, in Sefer Divrei Hayamim. And now, to get to where we need to be on this, is we're beginning to talk about, in Pasuk Yud Gimel, the face-off that occurred between Chizkiyahu HaMelech and Sancheiriv. And this is going to take place over a couple of weeks of learning. Chizkiyahu HaMelech, if you recall, had laid low. The northern kingdom had confronted Ashur, which was the rising power, and in the end they were defeated and they were exiled. However, when it came to the southern kingdom, they seemed to stay out of this until an opportunity arose. And that opportunity arose was a number of different factors. One was a new dynasty in Egypt that arose. The second was the death of Sargon in battle. And if you recall, according to historians, we know not only was he killed in battle, but his body was never recovered for burial. The same time, there was the rise once again of the kingdom of Bavel. And all of those factors played a role in Chizkiyahu creating alliances with Mitzrayim, the second largest empire, with apparently Bavel as well, and entering into a process of challenge to Ashur. Now, this occurred on the heels of the exile of the north. And at the very same time as the exile of the north, we begin to see descriptions in Nevi'im Achronim, actually, of a core principle of Jewish belief, which we hadn't really seen expressed in the same way, and that is the concept of Mashiach. Mashiach, if you think about it, when you look in the Chumash, you can find Ad Ki Yavo Shiloh, you find vague references to a period of time where everyone will be unified, but generally, Chumash is focusing on that first great era of going into Eretz Yisrael and not talking about a post-next diaspora. They were in their post-diaspora of Mitzrayim. And the same thing in the Nevi'im Rishonim, we don't find the same things. Yeshayahu actually introduces it, and this was the sheet that I sent to everybody last night. We actually had it the week before, and it comes from Yeshayahu Perek Yud Aleph. And in Yeshayahu Perek Yud Aleph is the famous description, which we all know, really Pasuk Vav, Vigar Ze'ev in Keves, this picture of the wolf laying with the lamb, V'namer im Gedi Bats, and a leopard with the young, the kid, the young goat, Ve'egel Ukfir Umari Achtav, and all of these animals all being peaceful together. This vision is Yeshayahu Perek Yud Aleph. But it begins with actually two psukim, which find themselves, an expression of them, find themselves in some interesting Christian theology as well. Because the opening psukim, and if you don't have those sheets, I'm going to pull up the text as well on my screen. I don't have the same opportunity as I normally do to send you what to show you what I sent you precisely, but let me just pull it up from Sefaria. And if you look in, again, I'm going into Sefer Yeshayahu. Perek Yud Aleph, and I'll be with you in just one moment. Here we are. Okay. And within this, so on Safaria, we begin to talk about Vayatzar Choter Migezer Yishai V'netzer Misharashav Yifra, that a shoot's going to go out from the stump of Yishai, David ben Yishai, from the Davidic household, V'netzer Misharashav Yifra, and also the twig will sprout from the roots itself. Now, there are two different pieces of here. The Malbim is going to pick this up, and this is what we are talking about. The Malbim is going to pick it up because there are two different pieces. One is a geze, and the other are shorashim. Geze is a stump. Shorashim are roots. What's the difference between a stump and roots? The Malbim is going to point out that this is talking about the difference of what's left. Do you see anything? Is there something that remains from the Davidic dynasty, or is it all covered over? V'nachal ruach Hashem v'ruach chochma u'vina ruach etzah gvura ruach dat v'yirat Hashem. And on this person who is going to come out from the Davidic line, God is going to give him wisdom and insight and counsel and strength and knowledge and devotion of God. All of those things are taking place. Now, in Christian theology, by the way, they say that this refers to Yeshu. There are some real interesting pieces about that, because if there was such a thing as Yeshu being the son of God, well, he isn't really from the Davidic line. His father may have been from his mother's husband may have been from the Davidic line, but God isn't from the Davidic line himself. And so there are some interesting pieces, but they say this is a reference to Yeshu. We don't, and we have a number of different other pieces to it, but all of these things, but this is for us a reference to Mashiach. Now, why is Mashiach coming in at this point in Yeshayahu's writings? Because Yeshayahu has already seen the exile of the northern tribes. Once you begin an era of exile, then you start talking about an era of redemption. And so the Redeemer is the person who is going to bring back all of the Jewish people together. That Redeemer is the Mashiach, the anointed one. And the reason why it's important to us, as the Malbim will point out in just a moment, is because that Redeemer may be Chizkiyahu. And according to Chazal, Chizkiyahu had the ability to be Mashiach. He was a candidate for being Mashiach by HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. He didn't achieve that. Simply put, the way we know for sure, by the way, the very same way that we know for sure that the claims of Christians that Yeshu is or was the Mashiach is also from the very simple fact that he didn't fulfill the rest of these descriptions. After he came, whether it's the first time or the second time, we haven't experienced if such a thing would ever be, but isn't going to be. There wasn't this world peace. There wasn't this negation of what we normally assume to be nature. All of those things didn't happen, which seems to be a pretty simple proof that he wasn't the fulfillment of these psukim. But the Malbim says, and I'm going to read from the sheet that we had, Vayetze, and it's in the middle of this piece of the Malbim, with the right viewpoint, says the Malbim, when I look in these words in Yeshayahu, there seems to be a basis for who that from the moment when you had the first exile, that's actually when you already start having the potential of a geula, of redemption. What I mean is, that from the moment of the exile of the northern tribes, that's the last thing we read, where it was repeated again in our parak about the exile of the northern tribes. That's when Nevi'im began to give their prophecies about how everyone was going to be gathered from the four corners of the earth. And there wasn't yet the Geula that would be, because Judah is by themselves, they're not together with the northern kingdoms, and know that there are two possible times for a Geula. Based on a pasuk elsewhere, we talk about that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will either redeem us in the proper time, or we will be redeemed at a later time. How do you have proper and later? One is Hazmana Katsuv Asher Lo Yavor Min Hu Vahala. There is a time, a set time where the redemption will be. It will not be later than that whatsoever. Lifnei Hazman, or it's possible that we'll be redeemed earlier. Im Yisku Al Yedei Masim Tovim. If we're going to have the merit based on our deeds. And that era of when we may be able to be redeemed because of our actions began from Chizkiyahu's times. And in the last parak of Sanhedrin, we also have this idea, that God wanted to make Chizkiyahu into the Mashiach. That Sancheirav Gog Magog, and he wanted to make Sancheirav, the king of Ashur, into the battle of Gog Magog, what we call in English Armageddon. But there was a sin which precluded this possibility. Because if they would have merited, what the Gemara is saying is that Chizkiyahu would have already been what we call Mashiach. And all of those destinies which we talk about in the future would have been fulfilled in his days. But because they didn't merit at that time, but therefore the opportunities exist, they're waiting for us until that set time, because then we'll be redeemed for sure. And that's why this whole piece of this nevuah is talking about the same time where we see the fall of Sancheirav, because that's when it would have been fulfilled. And in fact, however, the conditions that we just talked about, these two times of possibility, if we're zoche or if we're not zoche, if we're going to have the redemption earlier or have the redemption at the fixed time, is actually within the pasuk. One is going to be the sprout which is coming out of the stump, or you're going to have the sprout, which the twig which is coming out of its roots. There's a difference between a stump and roots. Roots are beneath the ground. But a stump is already a tree. You see something above the ground. And there's a difference between these two terms as well, between the idea of a shoot and a twig. Because when a tree is cut down, there's still a life there. What happens is it'll start growing, and slowly it'll come out. Because the branch which is coming out has a strength to it. If you already have this stump, the way it's going to grow is going to be stronger. But if you have no stump, and all that's left are the roots, and what's going to happen out of the roots is going to grow through the ground. Then what's coming out is not tied into the previous tree. It's like a new existence. And that's what's coming out of just the roots is very soft. It's not strong. It's just this little bit of a twig. And that's what it means when it says either you're going to come from the stump of Yishai. I would have meant that if the Gula would have come in the times of Chizkiyahu, Beit David, I'm sorry, because at that time there was a Davidic dynasty. And therefore, this idea of Mashiach coming from the Davidic dynasty, well, you see remnants of that Davidic dynasty right there, Chizkiyahu himself. that it was just a renewal of new strength. The other option is it's going to come from the roots underneath. And periods are going to pass until you don't even see the stump anymore. You're not going to find the monarchy, the dynasty of David. But the roots are still going to be left in the ground. And all you'll see is this root, which can't be seen actually. But when the time comes, the twig is going to start coming out, which means this is a new growth, which is coming out. It's very soft, and it's still drawing from the roots, which really isn't tied into the previous tree. And the way you understand this pasuk is either it's going to happen right away, boom, or it's going to happen at a later point. The reason I shared with you this Malbim is to also understand what was in balance at the time of Chizkiyahu HaMelech. Chizkiyahu was all that was left of a remaining portion of the Jewish people. Once we had lost the north, at that point, we were entering into a new era where we were hoping to bring back the northern tribes. Chizkiyahu could have been the one. And we see great things with Chizkiyahu. But he missed out on that opportunity. And because Chizkiyahu missed out on that opportunity, from then on, we have this hope of Mashiach, and we know Mashiach can come at any point if we're worthy of Mashiach arriving. If we're not worthy, Mashiach will come, but will come at the appointed time, whatever that appointed time may be. That's where we pick up on Pasuk Yud Gimel. Now, Pasuk Yud Gimel is already at the time when Sancheriv has gone and begun to once again try to recapture these places which he saw as rebelling against him. In the past, it was the northern kingdom. Now it's going to be the southern kingdom. And he's doing it out of a base of Lachish. Lachish is in the Kiryat Gat area. It was a major fortified city. We talked a little bit about it last week, that even in the archaeological digs, we see the capture that Sancheriv armies made over that city. And there was even a stele, there was a clay tablet that was found there in the archaeological digs, recording that this was in the time of Chizkiyahu, that this was Sancheriv and his armies, and they captured Lachish, which was a base. It's not far from Yerushalayim, and it was a major fortified city. It's the 14th year of Chizkiyahu's reign. Pasuk Yud Gimel. Allah Sancheriv Melech Ashur al kol arei Yehuda b'tzurot vayitbesem. Chizkiyahu went against all of the fortified cities, and he captured all of the fortified cities. Vayishlach Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda Melech Ashur Lachisha. And so Chizkiyahu, the king of Yehuda, turned to Melech Ashur, who was based in Lachish. And again, Lachish is not far. Lemor chatati shuv me'alai et asher titen alai esav vayasem melech Ashur al Chizkiyahu melech Yehuda 300 kikar kesef u30 kikar zahav. And as you recall, we talked about this. This is a bit of a review from last week, that Chizkiyahu said, I will pay you a tribute. I'll give you things. And he gave him this vast amount of money. We did the numbers last week. A kikar is about 30 kilo. Okay, as a result, okay, you have 900 kilogram of silver, 900 kilogram, 9,000 kilogram, I'm sorry, of silver. So if you want to know what it is in pounds, it's times 2.2, right? So it's about 20,000 pounds of silver. It's 19,800 pounds of silver that he gave him. Ushloshim kikar zahav, and 30 kilogram, it would be 30 kikar of zahav, so that's 900 pounds of gold. Vayitein Chizkiyahu et kol hakesef hanimtza Beit Hashem. He emptied out the treasuries of the Beit Hamikdash, uvotzrot Beit Hamelech, and he also emptied out the treasuries of the king. Be'etahi kitzetz Chizkiyahu et altot techal Hashem. And at that point, Chizkiyahu went ahead and he took down, or he cut down, or maybe he just stripped the doors of the Beit HaMikdash, V'et ha'omnot ve'asher tzipa Chizkiyahu melech Yehuda v'yitnem lemelech Ashur. And also either the omnot or either the columns, which had gold and silver plating on them, or it's possible even the doorways themselves. That's the Targum Yonatan. And he gave them to Melech Ashur. And if you remember last week, the last piece which we pointed out on this was the way we refer to Chizkiyahu. That initially we're referring to Melech Chizkiyahu, but now we're referring to him just when he gives this tribute, when he's paying off Ashur, which sounds like a vassal, he's just referred to as Chizkiyahu. He's demoted, okay? All of those are where he's at. Yeah.
What should he have done? He sees his people are going to be killed. He sees there he's being.
Chazal go back a step, and Yeshayahu talked about this as well, and we did a little bit last week. Chizkiyahu made a mistake by aligning with Mitzrayim. That he should have remained independent, and that independence wouldn't have led to, as you will see in a little bit, the challenges. He still is a great leader and a great king. And in that sense, where do we see it? We'll see it through the salvation he's going to have ultimately from Sancheriv. Okay, he will have that. But right now, he made a mistake. Don't assume that Jewish history is judged in the same manner as world history. We operate on a different plane. It doesn't mean that he shouldn't have taken care of himself. There's always this balance between what we refer to as hishtadlut or hishtadlus in English, of doing what you need to do, and emunah on the other hand. Okay, we've seen this actually, and now this is an opinion and a commentary on our day. We've seen it nowadays as well, where people sometimes say that they shouldn't wear a mask, or they shouldn't take a vaccine because they're not showing their faith in God. Okay, where's the right balance between hishtadlus and emunah? Now, Chizkiyahu, in this case, made an error. Okay, and what he did was he aligned with a great empire against another empire. But there's a risk when you do that alignment. And whenever you do the alignment, we see this. We see the modern politics as well. We see whether it's in American politics or Israeli politics. Who's Israel going to align themselves with? Okay, and you always take that risk, and you have to balance it. Chizkiyahu apparently was off on this, and this is where part of the challenge came.
So by aligning with Mitzrayim, he was shown. By aligning with Mitzrayim, he showed a lack of emunah.
What happened by aligning, he wasn't in danger. In other words, there was an equilibrium of relationship with Ashur before he aligned with Mitzrayim. We know this from history. What happened was Mitzrayim, and I sent you the chapter, if you remember last week from Tadmor in the history. What happened was that the Bavel and Mitzrayim saw they had an opportunity. The opportunity was to take advantage of Ashur. The southern kingdom of Israel wasn't in danger, but they chose to align out of hopes that they would be able to conquer Ashur.
So again, that's a lack of emunah.
That would be a step that was necessary. There was a lack of. I don't want to judge Chizkiyahu, but yeah, it was an unnecessary political move that took a risk. Whether it was because he felt he would be, I have to say, I think it's because of emunah, because he felt he would be safer. But there wasn't a clear and present danger in that.
Isn't there an issue also of aligning Dafka with Mitzrayim that's a problem? Or
well,
not?
Mitzrayim not going down to Mitzrayim. By the way, this new dynasty was a Nubian dynasty. They're from Ethiopia. They're not the pharaohs. Okay, I think it's the 24th or the 25th dynasty of Egypt at that time.
And where was a Navi to help him guide Chizkiyahu to see whether
Well,
he should do this or
there's
not?
Yeshayahu. Remember, Yeshayahu is a mishpacha. Yeshayahu is
Right.
a first cousin 4 times removed.
So
There
did
are
he
people
tell,
there. So
did he tell him not to do it?
so you see another nevuot where they say not to align. Yeah, Yafa. You have to unmute.
Sorry, thank you. So I'm going to go back to an older original king of Yehuda named Asa. And I think we had done together a description of a battle that Asa had. Can't remember exactly with who. Maybe the Ethiopians ganged up on him and he made some alliance with someone. And the Navi actually had told him that you should never have done that alliance. You should have only been reliant upon HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Asa was a great ancestor of Chizkiyahu. So there's this narrative that should have been circulating in the family. We don't do this kind of thing. And after some great filot to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Asa was victorious over whatever that giant enemy was. Sorry, I can't remember exactly. But it was a massive army, and the Navi had said to him, you should have been secure in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he would help you. It was an opportunity for you to have been super victorious. You blew it. And so historically, that narrative should have been passed down through the generations of the kings. So I'm just going to go back and say, hey, yeah, maybe there wasn't a direct text that's being told to us in what we're learning about Yeshayahu saying to Chizkiyahu, you should not have aligned with Mitzrayim. But this history is there. And
Right,
so why do you do that?
Right. And what you're referring to, just to go back, it was Ethiopia. It was the 10th year, if you remember, of his reign. And his alliance at the time, okay, was with Ethiopia. And I'm sorry, his alliance was with Ben-Hadad,
Yeah,
the king of Aram. Okay. And right, listen, we've had this, and by the way, this isn't the first time. Think about the Northern Kingdom. The Northern Kingdom made an alliance, and look what happened to them. So this is not something new that people wouldn't know about. And the balance in the political decisions that the kings make, their intent was true, but it's not the way we would need to operate. And so ultimately, he's finding himself into trouble, and here comes the next step. And believe it or not, we are 40 minutes into the shir, 10 minutes of which are my fault, but we are now starting with the new piece. Vayishlach melech Ashur Tartan vet Rav Saris vet Rav Sheka min Lachish el melech Chizkiyahu. And so the king of Ashur sent 3 major officials of his monarchy, and he sent them all over to Chizkiyahu. Tartan was the number 2 in the monarchy, according to Tadmor. If you look at Rav Sheka actually was the Sar HaMashkim, according to our understanding. Sanhedrin actually points out, and we'll see it in a minute, that Rav Sheka, according to Chazal, was actually Jewish, and he was an apostate. Sanhedrin is in Daf Samach Amud Aleph. And he brings these people together, and he says, El Melech Chizkiyahu Bechel Kaved Yerushalayim. And they come with this massive army. Okay, now, by the way, just one more thing, that Rav Sheka, according to the Targum, and Kohelet, Perek Yud, Pasuk Tet, there the Targum says, interestingly, that Rav Sheka was actually Chizkiyahu's son, who was a mummer, okay, who was an apostate. Whoever he is, we'll see from the text why we think he's Jewish. And they come with this massive army against Yerushalayim. Vayalu vayavo Yerushalayim vayalu vayavo vayamdu b'ta'alat habrecha ha'elyona asher b'mesilat tzedei choves. And where do they go? They're on the slope of the mountain up to Ir David. That slope of the mountain, we know it has a pool, the Talat HaBrecha, that is there, and it's Mesilat Tzedei Koves, and it's along a road, the Mesilat Talat HaBrecha. All of these Mesilat Tzedei Koves is where they would wash clothing. There was some kind of road partially up the way, up the mountain towards Ir David. Vayikru'u el hamelech, and they call out to the king. Now, the reality is they're not calling out to the king. The king is in the palace. But what they're doing is they're calling to the people who are representing the king. Vayetz elehem Eliakim ben Chilkiyahu asher al habayit, and out comes Eliakim, who was responsible in a major role in the king's household. Veshevna hasofer, and Shevna, who was the scribe, and the scribe was much more than a scribe. Veyoach ben Asaph hamaskir, and Yoach ben Asaph, who was the maskir, chief of staff kind of person. Vayomer aleim Rav Shakeh. Rav Shakeh says to them, now remember, Chazal say Rav Shakeh is Jewish. In fact, there is one thought in Chazal that he is the son of the king. Imru na'al Chizkiyahu, say to Chizkiyahu, Ko amar hamelech hagadol melech Ashur, this is what the great king, the king of Ashur has said, Ma bitachon hazeh asher batachta. What kind of trust have you put into the one to whom you have trusted? Now, first of all, notice who they're referring to. They strip Chizkiyahu of his title. This is meant to demean him. They didn't call him, tell the king, but they said, tell Chizkiyahu. What kind of trust have you done? Answer the Mitzudot. What kind of trust have you done to rebel against me? Like, what do you think you're relying on? Well, the Radak says, what was the rebellion? We remember he had stopped paying his tribute to him. The other possibility, the Malbim says, what kind of preparations for war have you done? Because of his treaties, which he had with Bavel and with Mitzrayim, there's obviously going to be an attempt to overthrow Ashur. What is this that you've done? Amarta ach devar sfatayim etzau gvura lemilchama. He says, wait a second. Until now, all you have done is talk. It's a lot of talk. What is this talk? You've promised people that they're going to succeed according to the Ibn Ezra, that all of this is meaningless. Says the Radak quotes his father, he says, there's nothing in this prayer you're doing. Verse Fatayim, he says, just praying. All you've been doing is praying a lot. Okay, you need the Eitzan, the Gvura Milchama. You have to have that idea, those ideas, the knowledge and the heroics to go to battle. Right now, who are you trusting in? That you go ahead and you rebel against me. Ata, let me tell you right now who you're going against. You're relying on this weak reed that is Egypt. Now, why would we use the symbolism of a reed? There's a lot of pieces. A lot of times we use symbolism of reed because we talk about that it goes back and forth. But remember, what is one of the great aspects of Mitzrayim is the Nile. The reeds, remember, that's where Moshe Rabbeinu was held as a baby, among the reeds themselves. But you've been relying on this simple reed that goes back and forth. You go ahead and you lean on a reed, and it pierces your hands. Paro is going to cause you damage the same way. If you're going to say to me, and if you're going to say to me that we've relied on God, now notice, relying on God means that you have to understand God. And Hashem Elokeinu, you're calling him by the real name. This is where Chazal starts saying that Rav Shakeh was a mumar, was an apostate. Halo hu asher esir Chizkiyahu et bemotav et mizbechotav. He's the one that Chizkiyahu took away all these bamot and all these mizbachot. Is that the God who you haven't been too good to, and you told everybody there's only one mizbeach to use? Now think about it from in the eyes of a pagan. What's better, one big mizbeach or a lot of little mizbachot? The reality for a pagan, to go ahead and say, get rid of all of these altars, that is the ultimate insult to their gods. For Chizkiyahu, he was trying to reestablish the centrality of the Beit HaMikdash and reestablish that Bamot were prohibited, he got rid of them all. But the other side of the coin, it sure looks like this God who you want to worship, you got rid of all of the places you can worship him. You brought it down to just one. What kind of great thing is that you're going to rely on him for that main purpose? That Rashi again says that Rav Shakeh is Jewish from this because he understands Judaism on the one hand by mentioning Hashem Elokeinu. The second thing is he's telling them, listen, this idea that he got rid of all of these mizbachot, this wasn't something that was simple for the people. He did it right away. It's 8, 9, 10 years ago that he got rid of all these mizbachot. But people, the population are probably still struggling with it. It's almost like a psychological factor with them that they're saying, if only we could do, well, you don't have it anymore. You only have one option. Not only that, ve'ata hitarevna. Okay, and now go ahead and let's take an eravon. Let's take a little wager. Okay, the third piece, et Adoni HaMelech Ashur, regarding my master, says Rav Shakeh, the king of Ashur, ve'etnel chalpayim susim. He'll give you 2,000 horses. Im tuchal lated lecha rochvim alehem. Do you even think you have enough people to man those horses, to ride those horses? In other words, who do you think you are? You don't have your God on your side. You don't have you've insulted your God. You go ahead, you don't have the army to do all of these things you need to do. How are you going to go ahead and go against one pacha? A pacha is, each one of them were governors. A pacha is a governor in modern English, by the way. A pacha translates to the term pasha. It's the same word. So these were officials. If there's even one of them, each one of those sarim, says the Rashi, he was a sar, he was an official over thousands. And Chizkiyahu can't even man a cavalry of 2,000 riders. So what do you think it's going to be? You're going to rely on Mitzrayim for them to provide you with the horses and the chariots? Ata hamibil'adei Hashem aliti al makom hazeh lahashchito. And now comes the fourth claim. The fourth claim, Rashi explains that ultimately he says, what, you don't think that God was on Ashur's side? That Ashur was able to do this? Rashi quotes Yeshayahu from earlier, Yeshayahu Perek Zayin, Pasuk Zayin, Yavo Hashem Alecha. It says that God is going to go against you. Says Rav Shakeh, God said he was going to go against you through your Navi. I'm the one who's going against you in the name of God. So all of these things, you think you have a chance? Hashem amar elai aleh al haaretz hazot v'shchita. I, Rav Shakeh says, in the name of Melech Ashur of Sancherib, I'm fulfilling the divine request. God told me, okay, that I'm going to do it. Now, interestingly, Rashi points out that nowhere did the Navi ever say that the nation that God is going to go against the people and destroy it. The word v'ashchita is something that Rav Shakeh threw in on his own. It came from him and not from the Navi. But the Navi said that another nation will rise up. Vayomer Eliakim ben Chilkiyahu v'Shevna v'Yoach el Rav Shakeh daberna el avadecha aramit. Now they come to him with a very strange request. They said, would you speak to us in Aramaic? Ki shomim anachnu, because we understand Aramaic. Va'al tedaberi manu Yehudit. Don't talk to us in Yehudit, in Hebrew, which was the Judean dialect. Okay, because people are hearing this who are also around. Now, on the simple explanation, okay, that what Rashi says, by talking to us in Hebrew, it's also an element of demeaning us. The lingua franca of those times was Aramaic. We're officials. Anu b'nei paltinu makirim baramit, says Rashi. We're part of the royal court. We understand Aramaic. Talk to us in Aramaic. Don't talk to us in the more common language. That's part one. On the other hand, what they also want to avoid is demoralizing the people. You have these mighty army coming. Now, Aramaic was not something that everyone spoke. Aramaic wasn't the language of Yehuda, and they wanted him to switch. Vayomer aleihem Rav Shakeh, ha'al adonecha ve'elecha shelachani adoni ledaber et hadvarim ha'ela halo al hanashim hayoshvim al hachoma. What? You really think that we're talking just to your master? We're talking to the people who are the population. We're talking to these people. Sancheiriv already decided, according to the Malbim, Chizkiyahu's out. I don't have to negotiate with Chizkiyahu. I'm going to conquer him. I'm talking to all of the other people. Lechol et chorehem ulishtot et. Let me do it into the right way to do the creed. Lechol tzoatam uvelishtot et memei raglehem imachem. The people who are now in such a state of siege that they're eating their own excrement and urine. All of these things are happening. Now, this is, by the way, the Marie Kra points out that these are the Tikkunei Sofrim. That if you look at the Kriyuch Tiv, and we've talked about Tikkunei Sofrim and other Shirim, the Tikkunei Sofrim were things that Ezra and Nehemiah Ezra Sofer and the Sofrim later on, they did make some emendations. There's a debate whether or not they amended the text on their own or whether or not there were alternative versions of this, whether it was through Ruach HaKodesh or not Ruach HaKodesh. And there are both sides of the debate, even though nowadays you generally only hear one side of that debate. But the reality is, if you remember, all of these words of the Nevi'im were words that were read out loud at different points. And there was certain language that you just didn't use. And so what's originally in the text is the most crass and foul language that a person would use. And as a result, at the time of the Sofrim, we have the Kri Uchtiv, we have what's written, which is really what Rav Shakeh said. And we have the way we pronounce it, which is a little bit less of a harsh language itself. This idea of preserving the language so that the Tanakh would still be able to be studied and would be something that would be respected as a Sefer Kodesh. Vaya'amod Rav Shakeh vayikra b'kol gadol Yehudit. And now Rav Shakeh gets up and he just blasts it out louder in Hebrew. Vayedaber vayomer shimu dvar hamelech hagadol melech Ashur. And he says, Vayedaber vayomer. He doesn't say it once. He says it multiple times. Listen to what the great king, the king of Ashur, is saying. Ko amar hamelech. This is what the king said. Not the Chizkiyahu, he doesn't count anymore. Al yasilachem Chizkiyahu. Don't allow Chizkiyahu to take you off. Ki lo yuchal latzil etchem miyado. Chizkiyahu will not be successful to save you. V'al yavtach etchem Chizkiyahu el Hashem lemor. And don't let Chizkiyahu say to trust in God. Yatzilenu Hashem v'lo tinaten et ha'yirazo biyad melech Ashur, saying that the king of Ashur will never conquer this city. Why? Al tishmu el Chizkiyahu kicho amar melech Ashur. Don't listen to Chizkiyahu. 3 times, don't listen to him, don't listen to him, don't listen to him, because this is what the king of Ashur has said. Asui tivracha, utzu elai, make with me a covenant. In this case, the brachas, Rashi says, shelat shalom, Mitzudot David says it's a mincha, give me the offering. And tzu elai v'ichlu ish gafno v'ish te'enato shtu ish mei boro. And you will have that prophetic moment where you're going to be able to be sitting under your vines and under the figs, and you'll be able to drink water out of the wells, all those things that people in a siege would only dream of. Ad bo'i v'lakachti etchem el eretz k'aretzechem eretz dagan v'tirosh eretz lechem uchramim eretz zeit yitzar udvash v'chyu v'lo tamutu, until I come and I take you to another land. Okay, this is, this very strange kind of promise. Don't worry, I'm going to save you. And while I save you, I'm going to transport you somewhere else. Okay. He doesn't say that it's going to be a greater land. It's going to be a land just like you have. So you'll recognize it. Va'al tishmu el Chizkiyahu. Don't listen to Chizkiyahu. 4 times don't listen to him. Ki asit etchem lemor Hashem yatzileni. Because he is tricking you and saying that God is going to save you. Ha'hatzel hatzilu Elokei hagoyim ish et artzo miyad melech Ashur. Did any other God save their nation from the hands of Ashur? Ayeh, and now he goes down the list. Ayeh Chamat v'Arpad, Ayeh Elohei Safar Vayim, Heina v'Iva. Where are all the gods of these nations I've conquered? Ki etzilu et Shomron miyadi. Did he save Shomron itself? Mi b'chol Elohei ha'aratzot asher etzilu et artzam miyadi ki etzil Hashem et Yerushalayim miyadi. Is there any precedent, any other king, any other God who has saved their nation that you think Yerushalayim is going to be saved? And the people were quiet. They didn't respond. Because that was actually the order of the king, not to respond to him at all at this point. Don't answer this challenge. ויבוא אליקים בן חלקיה אשר על הבית ושבנה הסופר ויוח בן אסף המזכיר אל חזקיהו קרועי בגדים. However, what happens? These 3 officials of the court, they went back to Chizkiyahu and they had torn Kriya. Vayagidu lo divrei Rav Shakeh. And they told him what Rav Shakeh said. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says, why did they tear Kriya? We've heard other people, other people speak harshly against the Jews. Other people challenge God. Why all of a sudden did they tear the Kriya? Because they heard blasphemy. The blasphemy was heard by another Jew who had gone to the other side. And when you hear blasphemy, you tear Kriya. It doesn't apply when you hear a pagan talking against God, but when you hear one of our own talking against God, and especially if you can imagine, according to that position, that Rav Shakeh is actually Chizkiyahu's son, this is the most horrific kind of thing that could possibly happen. The challenge, they're surrounded, they're under siege. And next week, we're going to see what happens to them. And so with that, I would ask 2 favors. First of all, keep on thinking about what we should be learning.